Sup guys, it's the Stick Figure Historian. Well, if you've been watching the last couple episodes, you'll remember that Parliament has been taking more and more control over the governance of England. And as Charles sat and watched the power slipping from his hands, he began to grow more and more restless. Why had he called this Parliament anyway? Oh yes, he remembered. It was because of the war with the Scots. Then an idea struck him. Could it be that the Puritans in the House of Commons had encouraged the Covenanters to rise against him, just in order to force him to call them back in session? Things certainly were working in their favor. Even as this new suspicion was forming in the king's heart, Parliament made a particularly bad move. They began to discuss impeaching Queen Henrietta. Okay, this joke is getting really old. They began to discuss impeaching Queen Henrietta on the basis she had been involved in Catholic plots. Fear and hate now threw Charles into a passion. Visions of poor Wentworth probably flashed across his mind. No, they would not touch the Queen. The lion was aroused. It was time to act. Charles went to the House of Lords and brought charges of treason against 5 members of the House of Commons: John Hampden, Arthur Hazelrig, Denzil Holles, John Pym, and William Strode. And, I guess we only have a weird sculpture of William, but it'll do, I guess. The Lords agreed with the king, but a bill cannot truly be passed until both houses of Parliament approve it. And quite reasonably, the House of Commons was not about to condemn their own members to death. The king was also actually legally overstepping himself a bit here, and they were sure to remind him of it. Charles was violating a thing known as Parliament privilege. This is a very important right that still exists in Parliament to this day, actually. It's a law that allows members of Parliament to speak their minds without being punished for it. Doubtless, the idea may sound familiar to you, for our American Bill of Rights also talks about this freedom. It's a very important thing for people to be able to say what they truly think, without worrying about getting in trouble with the government. It is a principle of liberty. Later on, we'll see that Parliament only wanted this freedom for themselves, but that's a story for another day. For now, they were just mad that the king was stepping on their right to speak. And they were right. Charles couldn't deny they were right. He was still angry, but he was also afraid. He thought about going in and doing something drastic, but he hesitated. Queen Henrietta and George Digby, the son of the Earl of Bristol, were too angry to be afraid. And just a side note, if you're wondering right now, what's with that dude's hair? Well, here's a real portrait of him. Yeah, you get the picture. Anyway, Henrietta and Digby came to Charles and insisted that he should forget the law and go arrest the 5 traitors himself. Still, the king hesitated. No king had ever done such a thing before. It is said that then Henrietta lost her patience. "Go, you poltroon! Go and pull those rogues out by the ears or never see my face again!" And so it was that just as King Ahab from the Bible listened to his wicked wife Jezebel, Charles did Henrietta's bidding. He gathered 400 soldiers, rather quite a lot for arresting just 5 men, don't you think? And marched straight to Westminster to capture John Pym and his 4 companions. Charles and his troops came barging through the doors. But the king was still a king. Of course, he didn't forget his manners. He politely told the Speaker of the House, William Lenthall at that time, that he must borrow his chair for a moment. Then Charles scanned the room for the hunted men. "John Hampden?" he called. No answer. "Arthur Hazelrig?" Silence. One by one, Charles called out the names of the men, but not one responded. They couldn't have. They weren't even there. Someone had heard that Charles was coming and sent word just that morning to warn the hunted men. All 5 had escaped just in time. They were hiding in another part of London. Charles turned to Lenthall. "Where are they?" he asked. Lenthall was a very brave and noble man. He would not betray the men, but he was still respectful to his king. He bowed down on one knee and gave a very gracious reply. "May it please your majesty, I have neither eyes to see nor tongue to speak in this place, but as this house is pleased to direct me, whose servant I am here, and I humbly beg your majesty's pardon, that I cannot give any other answer to this, to what your majesty is pleased to demand of me." A little more plainly put, he told the king that he couldn't tell where the men were unless the rest of Parliament gave him permission. Even more plainly put, yeah, forget it. If Charles's temper was aroused by this remark, he restrained it very well. "'Tis no matter," he said. "I think my eyes are as good as another's." He kept searching the rows of seats, but all to no avail. Now he was really getting mad. Not only had he lost his prisoners, but Parliament was claiming its own authority apart from him. "The birds have flown," he growled, and he whisked back off to the palace. Shortly thereafter, he discovered where the men were hiding, but when he demanded the city officials to hand them over, they refused. Riots broke out all over London over the next few days. The king had pretty much outright broken the country's laws of justice, and people were really upset about it. As the violence grew, so did Charles's fears. Perhaps he had made the wrong decision using force, but there was no going back now.